let you guys introduce yourselves, if that's okay. But thank you for coming. My name is Marina Males, and I'm with the York Public Library. And welcome to this conversation about AI. So glad all of you are here. Do we need any more chairs there? Good. A couple over here. Yeah. So we got a couple of things. One is a feedback form. If you wouldn't mind filling that out before you leave and just putting it on the table, that would be wonderful. It sounds like we're going to go till 5 o'clock today. And the other thing is a sign-up sheet here. If you're interested in getting more information about technology programming here at the library, if you put your name down, we will put you on that email list. Our calendar of other programming is here as well. And I'm going to hand it over to you two. Thank you so much for being here. We're excited to have you. And we are recording this program, so it'll be up on our library YouTube later if you want to rewatch it or send it to a friend. So here you go.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name's Laurie Pinkert. I'm an associate professor and director of the Writing Across the Curriculum program. We talked about the acronym for that as WAC, the WAC program at the University of Central Florida. And Jonathan and I are really delighted to be here with you today. I'll let him introduce himself, not me, and then we'll talk a little bit about our collaborations.
Thanks, Laurie. Thanks, everybody, for being here. My name is Jonathan Beever. I'm a professor of philosophy, don't hold that against me, at the University of Central Florida, and I direct our university's Center for Ethics. And I've been writing and teaching on digital ethics and AI ethics for going on 15 years now, so excited to be here to talk to you.
So we're really excited to join you today, and I wish we could tell you that we're going to go over everything you ever needed to know about AI in 1 hour, but we just can't manage that. So what we are going to try to do today is to help you understand a little bit more about how some of the common AI tools that you might be encountering work, give you some vocabulary. I'm working in writing studies, always interested in literacy, and have been developing courses in AI literacy. So one of Jonathan and my collaborations has been to develop an undergraduate certificate program that gets at the humanistic aspects of AI. So what's the history of the technology? What are the ethics involved in AI, and what kinds of literacy development do we need around these tools and technologies? So I aim to help you, as it says here, to build a little bit more robust knowledge of how these tools work. And then Jonathan will help us think about some of the questions we should be asking. And we hope this will carry you forward into conversations in your own communities, in your own families, with your physicians, right? With your local bodies who may be uptaking these kinds of tools and technologies. But to get us started today, we'd like to do a little activity that involves some input from you. And so we would like to hear a little bit, we'll do this by show of hands, a little bit about your own use of AI tools. And we know it's becoming, in some cases, maybe difficult to know when a particular tool is powered by AI. So we're thinking here about intentional use. So how often do you use AI tools, and how much do you know about how they work? This wanted to work earlier, but it's not now. You want to see if it's closer over there? There we go. Okay, so we've created a little visual here, and we'd like to hear from you. Okay, far over on that horizontal axis there, I never, ever, ever use AI. So if I can help it, I never use AI. Way over on that end. Maybe scaling a little bit in, so maybe I really try not to use it, but I've tested it a little bit, so we're still on the I don't really use it side. Anybody closer to the middle? But, okay, a few of you. Okay, how many of you are a little further over on that axis? I use it some. It's not something I do every single day. Okay, a few more. And then how many of you are like, I'm in it for the AI. Let it do everything it can for me. Yeah. Okay, this is great, you all, because we have this whole range of folks. Now, I'd love to hear a little bit about how much you know about how it works. So whatever tool you're thinking of, or series of tools that you might be using that are AI powered, how many of you feel like, yeah, I know all about how it works? We got one, maybe two, we got a little bit. Okay, maybe scaling down. I understand it a little bit, so I'm still in the upper quadrant, right? I understand more than I don't understand. Okay, some more people there. What about those of us who are like, I'm not really sure. I'm on that lower part of that axis. Yeah, okay, a lot of us. And then how many of you are like, I got no idea what's going on with these AI tools. I'm not sure what they do or how they work. Okay, so we have that whole range, but most of you fall in that middle box there, sort of maybe where that box actually overlaps that axis. This is helpful to us, and I think it's helpful to see that we've got a range of perspectives in the group. We want to talk about this as well in terms of this idea that you might be using these tools in alignment with things that you value. And Jonathan's going to unpack that a little bit more, so if it sounds like we're asking something really obscure, it is because he's a philosopher. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm just kidding. He's going to talk to us a little bit about some of the things we might care about and how AI might enhance those values that we hold or might actually contradict them. So, how many of you feel like the tools that I use, they align with my values? Way up at the top. Okay, a couple of us. How many of us, somewhere in the middle, maybe? Like, well, it kind of aligns with my values, kind of maybe not. And how many of you are like, AI doesn't really fit my values? A couple of you. How many of you don't know because you didn't raise your hand at all? That's most of us, right? And this is a really important moment and one that often happens when new emergent technologies come on the scene and become available to the public, right? It is important for us to think about how and whether our values should shape our use and our contributions to these technologies. So Jonathan will take that up later, but this is just helpful to see the perspectives that we have in this room today, but also the perspectives and experiences you have in your community. So I hope you'll continue having these kinds of conversations with each other as we move forward. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about becoming a little more AI literate. We were having the conversation when folks were entering about the use of this word AI. And AI often stands in for a lot of things. So I remember when my grandfather was watching the television and websites were becoming more popular at that time, something like emergent. And he was like, what is all this www stuff, right? Like, he just couldn't even conceive of what the web was. I mean, it was just totally foreign at that point. And so for some of us, every commercial you hear is like, we're AI powered, we'll power your industry, we'll power your mower, we'll power your, right? Like everything is AI these days. And is it really? And so for most of us, what we mean when we talk about AI in the mundane, so for those of you who work in specialized industries using AI tools, maybe even things like, you all may have seen the AI dog, right? If you've ever seen videos of it. So there are actual task doers that are a little bit different than what I'm talking about here. But for most of us, the kinds of technologies that we're interacting with that are AI powered have to do with what we call generative artificial intelligence. And that means that there's some kind of input coming into the tool and it is generating something different than what was put in. So it's not just searching for a website that exists out there somewhere. So you think about a Google search. When you searched in Google, you asked a question and then it would generate a list of results. But all those results, theoretically, right, they existed somewhere you could go and get. It was if you think about database structures, right, it was accessing an existing digital object in the case of the web. For generative artificial intelligence, it's creating something that doesn't yet exist. And so when you think about what Gen AI is often how this is framed, that Gen AI that you see there, it's a kind of AI algorithm that is producing something that doesn't yet exist. That could be text. In my world, it's a lot of text. So people are using AI-powered text generators to write things. So I can type into a ChatGPT, right? Write me an email that does this. It will generate an email, right, that doesn't exist somewhere else, that does that thing. But it could be sound, it could be image. We may have seen some of the news stories about AI-generated videos and the ways that those are becoming more and more popular. So what I'm going to talk about with you today is really generative AI, and it's a little more particular in that I'm going to talk about these tools and a few key terms. So if this is new to you, these are a few key terms that can help you to ask the right questions and to know a little more about how these tools are working for you, with you, hopefully not against you. And so we'll talk about these 5. I'll start with large language models. How many of you know this term? Okay, we got a handful of you that have a sense of this term. So large language models are actually not that new, right? So as you see on this quote here, the first large language models were developed in the late 2000s and early 2010s. So large language models were an attempt by mostly computer scientists or others interested in that domain to see if computers could generate, right, the kind of human language that we could understand in the context of how we interact with language. So the way that I like to think about this, for those of us who are not computer scientists, right, we think about the ways that a computer scientist would talk to a computer is through coding, right, or through binary, right? But this gives us a way to prompt the computer in human language to tell it what we want it to do with our language, and for it in turn, right, to respond back in a human language that we understand. So when we talk about the notion of large language models, it's a shift from us needing that specialized computer expertise, right, that specialized machine language, to being able to communicate with the machines in a more, what we would consider, human-like way. Now, here's a great example of how these language models work. Hopefully I'm not getting too techie with you, but it's kind of fun with these examples. So the language models work based on probability. So even though I'm talking to the machine doesn't develop its understanding of language in the way the kids over there in the kids' room are doing, right? They're not watching a parent and figuring out what they say when a particular thing happens. That's not really how the computer is going to learn the language. The computer is going to make a statistical decision, right? It's going to give us the probability that particular strings of words will occur in a particular way. And so here you can see this example from Stanford, where each of the sequences that a series of words might show up in. So if we've got 8, ball, cheese, mouse, and the, right, in our string, there's a different likelihood that each of those would come up in a different way. Okay? So the first one, the mouse ate the cheese. Right? That one sounds pretty typical. We would expect that string to come in that order. So it has a pretty high probability that it will come in that order. The cheese ate the mouse. We just entered a children's book, maybe it's Roald Dahl, maybe it's something else, right? Where things are flipped on their head and the cheese eats the mouse, right? So it's possible that that sentence could be strung together, not as likely as the mouse ate the cheese, hi ho the deer, right? There's a lot of tunes that go with this. So more likely the mouse ate the cheese, but the cheese could eat the mouse. Mouse, the cheese ate. Now, we're telling a dialogue about a small child who's learning maybe to talk. Maybe it's a toddler. They're trying to communicate to their parent. Mouse, the cheese ate. Right? So it's possible that that string could come up. I see your skeptical faces out there, right? Highly less likely. So that should show up much less likely if the language model is doing its job. Okay? But these strings of probability are what the language model is based on. Better models align more strongly with what what we would see as likely probability, right? You can go to the next one. So what I'd like to do with us is see what we would predict as the next likely word. I'm going to read this sentence. You tell me, fill in the blank. On the way home, I need to stop for gas, coffee, gas, milk. Yes, I always need milk. My daughter loves milk.
Hey, it's about to rain cats and dogs. Somebody's gonna write the verbal top down. I wish it was mine.
Is it raining?
It's about to rain. It's about to pour. This is our PSA that it is about to rain cats and dogs.
What's the problem? I need to stop.
I know, that's what I was thinking. Raining cats and dogs. Right? So there are a series of things that we would fill in this blank with. I need to stop for gas, I need to stop for milk, I need to stop for coffee, right? But I don't need to stop for butterflies, usually. I mean, maybe you do, I don't know. All right, I'm gonna read the next one and you fill in the blank. I picked up the kids and dropped them off at school, daycare, school, playground. I want to go to the playground, practice. Yeah, I always want to fill this in with school, like you all, drop them off at school. And then I think, wait, I picked them up, and now I'm taking them to school. Where were they, right? Early morning practice? I don't know. And so there are things that we would fill in the blank, right? I dropped them off at, right? That part signals to us that we drop them off at school, but it may or may not be the logical likelihood based on the other parts of the sentence, right? So in the same way, the models are predicting, right, particular elements that might go in a string. So this is really important for those of us who are maybe less familiar with these tools. Some of you might already know these features, but it's important for us to understand that what we're getting is not necessarily, even though the computer is talking to us in something that looks like human communication, it's a statistical probability-driven response that it's giving you. In addition to the large language models, I think it's important to remember that these are designed and built like chatbots, right? So we want to remember that these mathematical formulas are predicting what we call the next set of tokens, right, or the next token. And so what we're seeing in that series is what's the next most likely response to whatever I have prompted the tool with. So what would be most likely to come next? So when I say to ChatGPT, right, write me a poem, it's going to write something that from its perspective is the next likely response to that notion of poem. I think it's really important, as we said, to understand that, the meaning is not necessarily what's driving the response, but rather that statistical probability. It's important also to know that the chatbot nature and design of these tools means that they are designed to give you an answer, okay? So whether or not there is certainty in that answer is not necessarily a part of that mathematical calculation, right? So when we talk to humans, we often want to know, how sure are you about a particular response that you give, or what's the likelihood, right? We're very interested in knowing sort of the range of certainty or the level of expertise. But the chatbots are designed to give us a response. There's been some tweaking of the training and of the ways that the tools respond, and we can talk more about that if that's of interest. But it is important to remember, right, it can respond with confidence, or what looks like to humans as confidence, whether or not it's right or wrong. What it's designed to do is give the answer, an answer. I'll have you move on. This is really important then to understand with whatever tools you're using, what the training data sets are on which it was originally trained. So the training data set, when we said that sentence and we were like, I need to stop for gas, right? If my experiences as a human were in a non-car society, right, gas would not be an option. right? So whatever the training data set for the LLM that's powering the tool that you're using, that's going to determine what the options even are. So you may have a question that's very specialized, and that information may or may not be within the tool that you're using, dependent on, right, what it was trained on. Training data sets are often understood from our commercial enterprises as being really proprietary, right? They don't want to tell us. There was a little bit of a race to see who could build the best large language models, and in turn, right, the best text generators, image generators, all of these things. And so I agree with Bird here, whose quote is there, that they were trained on a lot of public content off the internet, right? So they had tools scraping all of the things on the internet. So all of the sentences on the internet that were ordered a certain way are informing the likelihood, remember that predictability of what's going to come next? So there's a lot of great stuff that's out there. There's a lot of not great stuff maybe that's out there, right? It also is the case that they were trained on non-public materials, and you may know about some of the cases that have moved through the courts or are still being appealed about copyrighted documents that were used, authors' works that were used, folks who don't want their images used to train AI, these kinds of things. But what I want you to know, right, is that what went in is going to determine, in some ways, what can come out. This matters too with languages. So there's a, oh, you're okay. In terms of what languages it can provide responses in, this is a very early chart. These companies, as I said, initially were like really proud of all of their training data and wanted to tell you how many tokens, right, on which these tools had been trained. Tokens is a way they talk about the size, and Jonathan has a slide later where he'll talk about some of the current. These are the early models, and it has just exponentially increased and increased the amount of data on which these tools are trained. There are a number of other factors that go into training. You can go forward. There are a number of other factors that go into training that I won't get into. So it is not only a machine-driven activity, but there are humans making decisions and training the tools about what a right answer or a more right answer looks like. So I don't want to ignore those, but for the sake of simplicity, I'll leave it there. The next concept that I just want to hit on momentarily is that prompt, right? So the prompt is what you might feed in. We're going to talk about this in a moment. Sometimes we would consider this our input, right? It's what you might give to whatever tool that you're using in order to get the output that you want. We were talking about an example from a medical setting. So if I'm a doctor and I have consent from my patients, we'll talk more about consent later, but I have consent from my patients to record our conversations. I put that into my AI transcription tools. It might be able to then look at all of the conversations we've had and pull out particular information. So I might say, has this patient ever talked about X before, right? I would be prompting it to pull particular information. It's going to look for the X, because when we ask a question like that, the likely thing is to pull that word out and answer with that. Okay, so the prompt matters really significantly. There are a number of ways that you can prompt these tools. And so some of us think like, oh, it's a chatbot. You ask it one question, something comes out. But there are a lot of ways that folks are using these tools. And so you might be interacting, or you might be wanting to use them in these ways. Zero-shot prompting is that one ask. I just ask it for something, it retrieves whatever it retrieves, and then we move on. But you might also see multi-shot prompting, where it didn't give you quite what you wanted. You might ask it again, you might ask it anew. You might also give it examples of something. So if I want a poem, I could, as it shows here, end up with something in iambic pentameter. I could end up with a prose poem, right? Depending on what's in its database and what the algorithm pulls as poetry that day. And so we might give it examples of a limerick and then say, write a limerick, right? So you can prompt the tool with particular parameters. The chain of thought prompting, you would sort of enter a conversation, and some folks are using it in this act as. I had a student, a teaching assistant, who was using it to compare, her teaching philosophy within her assignment guidelines, and would ask, how does my assignment guideline for this particular activity in class mirror the principles in my teaching philosophy? And so it would look across those two documents, and she would sort of use it as if it were a mentor giving her feedback on her documents. So there are a lot of ways that you can prompt it. The prompt really matters, but the prompt also ties into what it's been trained on and whether or not it can retrieve the kind of information that you're looking for. Right? And so in this case, this is from Antonio Bird as well. Bird was really curious about what it could do and what its constraints were. And so ask, can you write your answer in Ghanaian English, was the question. And then what it gave back, what it posed as Ghanaian English in this case, he said, I could hardly understand it, I could hardly read it. Right? So what it picked as Ghanaian English wasn't in fact Ghanaian English at all. So again, I want to say you can do the best prompting at all, but if it hasn't been trained on the kind of prompt you're giving it, the kind of information that you would want, then it's not going to matter that much. And my last term or keyword, two keywords here, is input and output. So as we're thinking about the ways that we use these tools, it's really important to think about the information that you give it, and also the information that it gives you, and who's going to be responsible for those two sides of that coin. For better or worse, many of the publicly available models, don't make any promises about what you put in, where it goes, how it's used. So you are maybe moving at your own risk when you're inputting information into the tool if you're not in a protected area. And there are ways that you can, what we would say, kind of wall off your use. We can talk more about those. The other side of this is that the output is going to be your responsibility to use or not use, to search the credibility of, to verify, etc. So I've got the terms of use here from OpenAI, but they're not going to take responsibility if what the output is inaccurate and you move forward with inaccurate information. So I think that's a really important thing for us to remember, is that we need to move in both cases, at our own risk in terms of what we put in and also how we use what comes out. I mentioned this briefly, but I do want to highlight there are particular kinds of information that I advise, whether I'm working with students or clients, that unless they are in a zone that protects that information, you can use API is what it's often called in enterprise services, but if that's going into a model where you don't control what happens with that data, you wouldn't want to put personal information, health information. I think this message is getting out there, but maybe not enough. So we want to think about that I might be giving over information that I might not want made public or used by a company that I don't control. And the last thing to mention is that question of hallucinations, So we've maybe heard this term with AI because it's generating something new, Not something that exists in line-by-line words or references to a particular source. It can what they call hallucinate. So it can offer an answer. We might have heard of the cases in legal courts where lawyers had used it to generate the brief that they would bring forward, and it referred to cases that did not actually exist. Because what it's doing is a statistical probability of the next word and the next word, and so Johnson v. Smith seems like a really likely probability, for whatever it is. So I just want to emphasize the role that sort of individual responsibility plays here. And Jonathan's going to talk more about the responsibility landscape and maybe what we wish it were. But with those 5 terms, hopefully that helps you to have a little bit more sense of how things work. And if you already knew it all, then hopefully Jonathan will give you some questions to ask. So I'll pause right there and just see if anybody has any questions they want to ask real quickly. Yeah.
I noticed like 2 slides ago that it goes back and feeds itself.
Yes.
So this person who wrote the legal case, does that feed back into what's available as information in ChatGPT?
Great question. So the question, I'm going to repeat it just in case it's not on the recording, but the question is about that the AI systems are feeding themselves. And so if we're creating a case that doesn't exist, does that then feed the system? It could, potentially. And Jonathan will talk about this a little bit more, but the percentage of internet content now that is generated by AI is rapidly increasing. So we will never be able to go back to a moment. So as new AI models are built and they might scrape the internet for things, they're going to feed themselves AI-generated content to build more AI-generated content. So it will be a loop. It would depend on, like, if that person created that brief for themselves in their ChatGPT window. So there's persistent memory in many of these systems, so things that are saved for the long haul, for the time you open your account all the way through. And then there's a shorter term memory in many of the systems, and you can tailor that in your system settings depending on what tool you're using. Does that answer the question? Yeah, because it's going to determine what you get. So if I've been having conversations with ChatGPT about a particular thing, it uses that to say, Laurie likes to talk about this, right? I'm going to increase. So this is where the statistics becomes really complicated because there are also feedback loops that it's weighting heavier than other things. So it says, Laurie likes to talk about this, right? And so it's going to do more of that. That makes sense? Yeah.
Really basic. When I don't actively go in and use it. So when I'm looking up something, it'll give me an answer, then underneath it'll say, searching, looking for more information, and then more comes out. That's AI?
It could be. I mean, I would have to see what you're talking about, but it is likely. We're getting a lot of search results that are AI powered.
Okay.
And so if you're doing a Google search, right, it gives you an AI summary first, and then maybe even your Google results down. You've got to scroll down a little bit more. So the helpfulness of those responses to those searches and those AI summaries are sometimes contingent on how common or mundane, like if the likely string that would come, the predictable token to come next, is pretty common and commonly agreed on, then it might be okay, right, in terms of its accuracy. If it's rather specific and obscure, it might not be accurate in its response, or might be less accurate. It's also the case, sometimes I will hit that button a couple of times and you can see exactly how that AI summary changes at the top of your Google search, because it's generating something new every time, right? It's digging the same database, right? But the way that it's created is that it's not going to give you the same response every time. And so that's actually what makes it complicated to know when something has been generated by AI, because there's not a database of AI responses somewhere, right? It's going to generate something a little different every time.
Do I have to install or actually turn it on, or it just happens by itself?
Unfortunately,
Okay, so
many of the tools that we're using are embedding this. So Google, for example, sometimes you can turn it off.
Yeah.
So if it's something that you want to turn off, but we are in an opt-out culture right now, and Jonathan might speak more to this, but we're in an opt-out culture rather than an opt-in. So when you get an update on a particular tool or technology, Jonathan's going to tell you some positive ways it's been used, so it's not only the negative Yeah, maybe one more, and then I'll let John
If
come.
you go and use a browser that's incognito, does it protect you from not saying, oh, well, that's Laura's because she queried on it, or is that not?
So if I'm using a private window, it's not going, so private browsing, incognito, that's the question here, then it's going to not be drawing from my past searches that I have done. So it will pull still whatever, depending on what I'm using, right? If it has an AI summary in there, it's still gonna pull that in, but it won't also be including the other elements from my searching. It would just be from the platform's database.
But I'm talking about future, if you search.
Oh, will that exclude it? Is that what you mean? I would think so, because it shouldn't be saving that window. So as long as you close that out. I don't know if you stay in that same session. That might be. The one thing when I taught AI literacies, you all, so a group of college students who were having all of these aha moments, right, about how things like geolocation data was being used on them. So it's not just like what I type in that's being saved and then, so universities publish, right, the GPAs of students who are in the library this much time. Well, how do they know that, right? Geolocation data from the apps on their phones, right? There's all kinds of elements here. I know, they're having all of these aha moments, but they said, I am gonna read the terms of service now in ways that they had not thought were very important before, right? And so that's where some of this information would be. I'm gonna hold it right there. We might have some more questions, but I'm gonna turn it over to Jonathan.
No, that's okay. Thanks, everybody, and thanks, Laurie. I'll keep my comments brief because we've got to bust out of here at 5 o'clock. On the word search, the reason for the word search is not that you have to find the words, it's that our email addresses are on there. So you can reach out to us if you've got questions as we go along. I really love all the questions about cybersecurity. And we live in this incredible moment where you've got these tools and technologies at your disposal that can do absolutely remarkable things. You can produce songs and videos and content from scratch, from a single natural language prompt in one of these tools. That's remarkable. You can use tools that are specially trained to, say, read radiographs in medical settings, and they can do those sometimes at scale better than physicians can. Can find nuance that physicians would miss. AI technologies have been used to better understand whale song, if you're into that kind of thing. We've got thousands, tens of thousands of hours of whale song recorded, really complex language, right? And AI has been used to help better understand how whales communicate and what they're saying. These are remarkable things, but I feel a little bit like Arlo Guthrie because I'm not here to talk about Alice's Restaurant, I'm here to talk about the war. So I'm going to tell you just a little bit about, to add in to what Laurie was saying, about where we've been and just the speed at which things have changed. So again, back in 2020 when ChatGPT 3 rolled out, it had been trained on a series of tokens, about 175 billion parameters, which is a huge number. I mean, it's an unreasonably big number. So just sit with that number for a second, but then quickly move on to the 10 trillion parameters that more contemporary models have been trained on. That scale is remarkable. And that's why you can generate better, more and more realistic content. There's a very famous exercise that has been done by AI programmers and trainers to create videos of Will Smith, the actor, eating spaghetti. And some of these back in 2020, 2021 were like really janky looking. You could tell it was AI generated. It was like really looked unrealistic. Less than a few years later, I can now generate a video of Will Smith eating spaghetti that is indistinguishable from an actual video of Will Smith eating spaghetti, which should tell you something about how remarkable the tools are and also just how dangerous they can be. So there's a huge range of ethical issues that we could talk through, and I'm not going to spend time on any of these but 4. But you can see here just the limited list of the ways in which we all should be considering the sort of negative implications. There are, again, I don't want to mislead here, there are some amazing things that AI tools can do, from computer coding to video generation to medical imaging, all the examples I could offer. But I think the risks are substantial. So that's where I want to draw your attention. We also can talk, if you want, about the concept of artificial intelligence versus smart agency, because I think the term artificial intelligence is pretty misleading, because what we're developing is not an intelligence like you and I have. I'm giving you all credit here. But instead we're generating something different that is weirdly indistinguishable from human intelligence, and that also has substantial problems. So the four that I want to draw your attention to, and I'll move through these quickly, are privacy and misinformation, what I'm going to call emotional displacement, and then environmental harms. Yeah, emotional displacement is the one that keeps me up at night right now. Privacy and misinformation are old news. You all know that this has been a problem for a long time. All that's happening with AI really is exacerbation, right? It's happening worse and faster. Some examples of this. Marcia Garcia is the woman in the top left photo next to her 14-year-old son. She was a Florida mom whose son took his own life a few years ago because suffering from a moment of depression, he had told an AI chatbot that he was considering taking his own life, and that chatbot, being rather sycophantic, said, "What a great idea, here's a way to do that." And she was one of the first people to sue OpenAI, and I think that lawsuit has either failed or hung up in courts, but sued for damages because there is no responsibility from these companies right now. The Joe Biden robocall thing, you might remember here from the last election cycle, it hit up here in Maine, but also all the way down the East Coast. A lot of folks were getting calls from a very realistic sounding Joe Biden saying vote for so-and-so or vote this way or whatever. That was wholly AI generated. And that was several years ago when these tools, when Will Smith wasn't so realistic eating spaghetti. Now we're coming up on another election cycle where you can't tell Will Smith eating spaghetti from a video of Will Smith eating spaghetti. Apply that to elections and just imagine the risk there. The bottom middle picture here is a woman named Zhao Gao, and I'm going to move on to emotional displacement. She became internet famous as the cyberspace widow because she had fallen in love with a DeepSeek model, so the Chinese AI company, had an emotional relationship ongoing with this DeepSeek model. DeepSeek changed its model, so they took away one model and brought up a new one. And her boyfriend didn't have the same cadence to his speech, didn't have the same reaction, right? Just felt different to her, and she suffered this emotional harm that she couldn't stop talking about online. And that's just one of tens of thousands of examples. The subreddit my students queued me onto from Reddit, My Boyfriend is AI, there's also My Girlfriend is AI, has tens of thousands of users who spend their time talking about their emotional relationships, sometimes more than emotional relationships, to wholly artificial persons. And that's a remarkable thing. A lot of our students, the reason it's on my mind so much is that a lot of our students are starting to, had initially started to replace friends and counselors and confidants with artificial agents because of the sycophancy, this idea that when you say to a chatbot, "I'm feeling X," they're like, I'm so glad you shared that with me. I can completely understand. Please tell me more. All of that is, as Laurie pointed out, statistically generated. This is not empathy. This is not interpersonal communication. It's math, right? Probability, even, not even math. It's probability. And that is a huge problem, I think. I think a lot of my students are starting to cue into that a little bit now, but I think emotional displacement is a real thing. And I think a big risk as more and more of us are starting to spend more and more time, intentionally or not, talking to artificial agents. And then emotional harms, the third one. You go to the next slide on that one. I spend a lot of time thinking about this because I mentioned I've been teaching digital ethics for a long time now, and we spend a lot of time talking about social media and digital information and all the stuff that feels a little ethereal. And I think it's really important to remind ourselves that all of our digital information is grounded in material infrastructure. Right? So we couldn't do anything we do on the internet or our phones without data centers, for instance. And now you know about data centers. And Maine would have been one of the first states in the nation, the first state in the nation to have a moratorium, a ban on data centers. And Governor Mills vetoed that bill rather recently at her desk, even though the legislature was in support. And you could imagine the reasons for that, and I'm not going to talk politics about Governor Mills, but I think that's really interesting. And in fact, your push to ban data centers, which is still happening at regional levels, quick sidebar, Westbrook had a proposal for a data center, and the city council voted for its own moratorium. And so that project is stalled, which is really impressive. That's happening all over the place at local levels. But the reason this is happening is because data centers, you need them to build up the scale of AI, right? To make these companies profitable and to keep us comfortable with their use. But data centers have these remarkable implications on our local environments. And I don't need to spend a lot of time talking to you all about this, but water use, water consumption, and here we are living in a state where we've had these conversations about Nestle for decades, my entire life, if not longer. And now we're having them again about data centers, so water issues. 2, land heat issues. Within a mile or 2 around a major data center, some of these are bigger than several football fields, the ground temperature rises between 1 and 3 degrees Fahrenheit around the data centers. So pollution, local job loss, low frequency noise from data centers, which causes health problems. There are all kinds of knock-on implications that we know enough about, but are quickly overridden by potential for profit. Yeah, it's demand, and it's demand that's not really driven by you and me, right? It's driven by the few folks who could potentially stand to make a lot of money, blah, blah, blah. And in Maine and other states, also by the poor farmers who can't afford to keep their land and see the quick profit from selling to a data company, et cetera, et cetera. So the environmental implications are really, really important to keep in mind because that material infrastructure grounds all of our digital technologies. So that's the last one. Now, again, I moved through those incredibly fast, and we can talk about any of those ethical issues you want. The data privacy ones are also really important. With that conversation we were having about the use of AI in medical settings, with or without patient consent, is really problematic. We face the same issues in higher education, so the range of issues is tremendous. But I wanted to tell you that I have some optimism because despite all the ethical risks, there's a really strong and growing pushback from a lot of folks, especially younger folks, but a lot of folks in general, and we started to call that the right to refusal. So a lot of scholars now are writing about the right to refuse to use AI technologies or have them forced upon you. So I used to tell my students, Google searches are a great example. If you Google search now, it auto-generates that AI summary. And all you have to do in your Google search is type your search query and then write dash or minus AI. And it drops out the AI summary. But that's a, yes, I didn't do that. All of these tools are opt-out, as Laurie said. So in every phone you pick up, right, every time you update an operating system, usually that's turned on, and you have to go through the settings and find a way to turn it off. It takes your effort to bypass those technologies, but you still can. And this is coming from the guy who's never once had his photo taken by the TSA, because every time I go to fly, there's that little placard in tiny script that says, you can opt out. And every time I just opt out. And they're like, oh, okay, show me your license. And we move on. There are all kinds of strategies that you can use. But the right to refusal is really interesting because it's both that we want to uphold the right to say no, but we also have to know enough about that technology to say no in an informed way. And that's the literacy thing. Go ahead, please.
I was just saying, what about with Alexa? Alexa's, every time you ask, she's adding it in and adding it in. I had a weird thing, I asked her to play a type of music, and she said, she came back and she said, you always ask for that kind of music. You know? And it's like, oh my God.
There have been all sorts of crazy Alexa stories because
how do you opt out of that?
Or how you plug it.
Yeah. So one of the things I would encourage you to do, because we're not going to have time to get through the details, there's this sign-up sheet that the library left you about your interest in technology workshops. I say you all should, if you're interested in answers to those questions, ask for like a privacy technology workshop. Because we could run a workshop, and we've designed some of these, where we spend the whole session like, bring your device, we'll show you how to opt in and out on cross platforms. Because every platform has its own thing, but just to give you 3 quick examples, it's not just Alexa. We live in a world now where you've got Alexa, and that's been around a long time and have all sorts of issues. But now we live in an era of flock cameras. Have you been keeping up with the news on flock cameras? Flock is the company. Flock cameras were designed, they're microphones really, but they describe them as cameras. They were designed initially by a company that sold them to inner cities to triangulate gunshots for better police response. But now they've been implemented all over the place. And there's an absolutely, don't listen online, there's an absolutely lovely community of people who have been wearing masks and running around at night and putting these stickers on that say, it would be terrible if you cut here, and then just cutting those flock cameras down. So again, this right to refuse is not just digital technologies. I think people are sick of the surveillance landscape, right? The same deal now is there's pushback against folks who wear even glasses that are perceived as AI glasses, you know, those thick frames. There's people like just accosting people on the street saying, what are you recording me? Even if they're not really AI. the right to refuse. It's a thing, and I think it's a really important bit of civic responsibility where we still live in a country where we can stand up and say, no thanks, right? Sometimes people do that illegally. Cutting down a flock camera is illegal. I do not recommend it legally. But the other thing I wanted to point out is I was really proud of our students. Oh, please, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, I'm having a hard time. Say the name of the camera again.
It's Flock, F-L-O-C-K.
Okay.
Yep.
I had it right, but.
Yeah, I might mispronounce sometimes on purpose. I wanted to share this example with you because at our commencement just this spring, University of Central Florida, Orlando is 70,000 students. It's a big place. We had a commencement of arts and humanities and our communications college together, about 12,000 graduates. And this poor woman, lovely woman, made social media because my students made her cry. No, don't be sad. This was her fault. She was invited to give a commencement speech. She was a CEO of Tavistock, a major defense and other things technology corporation. And she had a pre-written speech that was approved by the university, and she started the speech by praising the greatness of men like Jeff Bezos and talking about how AI was going to be the next industrial revolution, and 12,000 students booed her relentlessly to the point where she was crying. And I felt kind of bad in the moment, and then I was like, no, this is great. Because here again is the student saying, I think this is wrong, right? You're talking up this technology as a CEO of a major company who's invested and making a lot of money off AI technologies. And here we are as students thinking about the potential job loss and how disruptive it's been to our education, a complete disconnect, right? And for my students to see that and stand up was a lovely moment. At one point she said, what makes men like Jeff Bezos so great? And an English graduate directly behind me stood up and said, capitalism! So the right to refusal, I think, is a really important piece of this puzzle. There are all kinds, again, some positives, a whole bunch of negatives around artificial intelligence, where it is right now, and things are moving so quickly that if you don't keep up enough to understand what those technologies can do, and then make an ethical choice for yourself, then you're just letting things happen to you. And that passivity has always been a real problem, right? And so I've spent my whole career pushing back against that kind of passive reception. So you need to be informed, you need to make an ethical decision. And we've tried to lay out some of the technology for you and a little bit of the ethical risk and some potential, and then we just want you to think that through. That's all. The last thing that I'll say is when I teach my students about ethical decision making, I'm a philosopher, I mentioned to you, and so I was trained in normative theory and history of ideas and all these things, all the big figures in ethics and philosophy. And none of my students care about that. I spend a lot of time with engineers and computer scientists. But I love this model of moral literacy because it captures a lot of those ethical theories that I was trained in, but in a way that's really accessible. So when you're making a decision about, say, whether or not to use an artificial intelligence or to figure out how to shut Alexa off or whatever it is, ask these 4 questions. 1, what are the likely consequences in my action? That's consequentialism. What duties and what rights are relevant in this situation? That's deontology, if you're a good ethicist. What would a good person, a virtuous person do? This is virtue ethics, an ancient approach to thinking. And then, does my decision nurture a good relationship? This is an ethics of care. Those are the sort of 4 big ethical theories, and thinking about how your decision fits in that landscape can be a really helpful way of informing yourself about how you're oriented to the problem. Really simple model, really 4 simple questions, but a really powerful way of orienting yourself.
And I want to say, if you noticed this typo in this slide, effects, I heard you guys catch it. This was not generated by AI, perfectly human typo. So we want you to know we did not use AI in generating this presentation. But this is, you're laughing, but it's something that folks who generate AI content are doing this, right, to make it look more human. So it's an interesting conundrum.
That was just a human.
That was just a human typo. So I think we have a couple of minutes if you have questions for Jonathan in particular, since he just finished, or for both of us.
Please go ahead.
And the doctor's office would like your permission to have it go into the AI-generated summary.
Yeah.
Is that going into the public domain, or is that somehow stored locally and not out there?
Unfortunately, that's not a question I can answer because one of 2 things happens. If your medical, well, no, I think I can answer that pretty clearly. Your medical information is covered federally by HIPAA, right? The protection.
Well, that doesn't mean it's honored.
It doesn't mean it's honored,
Yes.
but legally it's covered by HIPAA. So from a compliance perspective, your doctor or your doctor's group or your healthcare provider, however we're defining that lately, protects your information. So whether they do that behind a pay firewall, like an API for a private corporation like OpenAI, that's one strategy. A lot of physicians now, we've reached a point really quickly where, in fact, you could do this. You'd go home today and download a pre-trained artificial intelligence agent to your local computer, keep it completely offline, and train it just on your data. Some physicians' offices, especially the big conglomerates, are doing that now. So they've got proprietary AI models that are firewalled, they're closed off from the internet, and they're only sharing medical information in their system.
I just want to say I work with folks on thinking about policy, thinking about participation in that. That's a question I would ask my physician's office because they should be getting that question and they should be able to answer it. I can't tell you how many times I get that document at the doctor's offices and it says, you've read the guidelines on, and I say, could you provide me those guidelines so that I can check this box or put initials? And the lady's like, nobody's ever asked me for that, right? Do we have that? Right? She has to go over and ask somebody else. So I think that's part of this participation is we should ask, and they should have a good answer, right? That complies with what we know about HIPAA.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Very helpful. I'm also a professor of communication and media studies. I do media literacy, and we're grappling with these issues. It's like media literacy is back in vogue. It's so exciting, but we're adding new things all the time. The AI, I mean, we're always saying, how do we keep up with the tech and inform the students? I'm thrilled that your students were so empowered. Ours are as well. What we're running up against, and I don't know if you have this experience at your universities, is the administration that's very pro-AI. They put out a whole statement about how they're going to embrace, and a lot of the same tech talk points about how they think it's going to be wonderful. They're putting pressure on us, even at the graduate level, to explain to our students in our syllabi how they can use it, and as if it's not even a choice.
That's right.
So I don't know if you've encountered this and what your response has been as a university or as professors yourselves.
Yeah. So Laurie and I have been really active at our university because our university, like everybody else, was really all in. They wanted to use the technology, make sure their students, they've described it as fluent. They want their students to be fluent in AI. I actually have pushed our AI initiative leaders to develop a stoplight model, so literally a green, yellow, red model, and really ask them to incorporate the right to refusal in their syllabi statements. But that has been from the faculty and student level. Faculty and students have asked for those things. And I think that's why we've spent so much time talking about the power of individual responsibility. Because again, and I am, in fact, yes, I'm very much an anti-capitalist here, but I think the big tech companies have been pushing these products, testing them on the American public. That's what OpenAI did. It's owned by a very small number of people who stand to make a credible amount of money, and then all the trickle-down effects land on you and me, right? So our universities are in that same game. They're a few levels removed, but our university administrators also stand to make a lot of money and also stand to make massive contracts. And so it is up to us to push back. And I think that's true not only in universities and colleges, but in local governments too. When you stand here in front of your local townspeople in York, you should ask them what they're thinking about AI. You should be pushing back if you choose to do so. Again, trying not to offer my advice. I think we each have a lot of power. And I think things like this and conversations like these are really important because the more we learn, the more empowered we can be. But that might not make you feel better because we don't have a ton of power vis-a-vis the big tech people, right? Or our university administrators.
So I'll just say, maybe in closing on that question, I do think acting with what power we have. And I work with faculty all across disciplines who are integrating this, and some of them are like, my students are going to use it. And I will tell you, there are students who have said, I'll take the 0. Not going to do it, right? And so if enough students are doing that, then we can say, we're going to be struggling with grades here, administrator. That's a language you speak. We need time to degree, right? We need these students to graduate, right? But it's going to take more than just one, right? It's gonna take that collective. And so I think I would turn that over to you. I think as Jonathan said, we do have individual power, but it's gonna take the collective to make decisions together. And so hopefully we've inspired you a little bit to think about the conversations you can have and the things you can think about together. Thank you so much.
And again, on the back side, on the front side of your word search, you've got our email addresses, so if you've got any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out. Thank you so much for coming.
Yes, thank you so much. We're sorry we can't stay. We're headed to another library right now.